Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to Texas Football, and welcome back to another edition of Football Theory. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers, pleased to be joined by my esteemed colleague and good friend Jeff Howe. Today, we want to dive in, and my man Jeff loves talking, the trenches, loves to get into some trench conversation. So we'll talk about the defensive fronts a little bit and get into, obviously, Will Muschamp. He's going to bring a new idea of defense here to Texas, a more aggressive one, and I think it'll start with the front. So, Jeff, I know you've been really excited about diving into this topic, so I'll let you lead the way.
Yeah, I just think about Will Muschamp, and again, you can even look at his time at Florida and his time at South Carolina, but I really look at, his first go-around at Texas and what that Georgia staff was doing while he was a part of it to get an idea of what he can do at Texas. And the first thing that came to mind was, and we talked a lot about this, his first go-around at Texas, he had pass rushers really from the interior D-line, obviously the edge, and from the second level. So basically, there's three different ways within your defensive front that you could get after the quarterback and cause disruption. And we know that at Georgia, they just recruited guys that had a knack for getting after the quarterback. We think about that Georgia defense in 2024, even though he was an analyst for that team, Michael Williams and Jalen Walker. And even you go back to the Georgia defenses in 22 and 23, really versatile, could shift fronts, could stem late, had the ability to stop the run or get after the pass with kind of the same personnel, guys that were able to play multiple shades. And you were giving me some numbers, Rod, before we started recording that I think are worth getting into, because I expected PK to take a leap where Texas got more exotic, basically knowing that you were, I'm not going to say personnel deficient, but considering the losses that you had, specifically you lose an Alfred Collins, a Vernon Broughton, a Baron Sorrell, you may need to be a little more exotic, dial a little more stuff up if you were going to be, lack some experience that you had with that group. Yep. But it's interesting that based on, and there's one area in particular I'll let you get into, Collins and Broughton, specifically Collins and even Sorrell, were guys that could play multiple shades. Mm-hmm. And I think you had some of those guys this past season, but we never really saw, Rod, that diversity that I think PK really needed to tap into to keep from being predictable, to keep opponent game to game, just to switch things up. Man, you might want to come out in an odd front, or hey, if it's an even front, maybe you want to, slide the front late or whatever. Just never really saw him get into that in 2025.
Yeah, I think he was a little bit, handicapped by the lack of proper personnel to do so, right? When Texas had probably as deep a D tackle room as anyone in the country the last few years, you go look at the A gap snaps. This is Pro Football Focus, so this is their numbers. Texas had three different players in 2024 with at least 100 A gap snaps. That number dropped to 0 in 2025. You had Cole Brevard had 96 A gap snaps. That number was 1 in 2023. I think it was just Byron Murphy in 2023. But in 2022, it were 2 D tackles you had with at least 100 A gap snaps. And that was 2 in 2021. So I think ideally you'd like to have multiple guys, all right, on your roster who you believe can give you that amount of volume at the 0 and the 1 technique. And if you don't, like you just pointed out, it's going to limit what you can do with your fronts, in terms of your odd, even fronts and how multiple you can be. And you can make the argument Texas wasn't as multiple last year with their fronts just because they really didn't have the personnel, which is why going out and getting a guy like Ian Gerfraud was huge. This guy last 2 seasons, 324 snaps in the A gap. So you were money balling the 0-1 technique last season with different guys. Throw Cole Brevard in there, throw a little Travis Sharp, throw a little Hero Canoe in there, throw a little Murad Watson in there. Now you got a guy that's his expertise, that's his speciality. He's one of the best in the SEC, as you point out, a line of scrimmage league at that 0-1 technique. And the truth is, that is just a rare thing. It's a rare commodity. Yeah, there are a lot of big guys out there, but big enough to be and I would say, mobile enough to be able to play that 0 and powerful enough to play that 0 and that 1 technique. Not a lot of guys can do that. That's why Muschamp made a priority to go out and get your fraud. So now you got him, and then you got a couple of other guys you're developing, like a Josiah Sharma, who should, and I think he's playing like 6 A gap snaps, but he's got the frame, right? He's 360 or a little bit more than 360. That's the frame. Ian Gerfraud's 380. 369 or something. They probably trying to get him down to 360, right?
Yeah.
370. And then you got the young kid Zion Williams you brought in, who's also he's about 360. So those are probably your three guys that you're looking at that could play that zero technique or that one technique. But Ian Gerard is like he's going to be your starter there if you want to start with a guy out there who plays that zero or that one technique, and he plays a lot of snaps for a guy that size. Usually you don't see guys that's. In fact, here's my stat of the day for you. Ian Gerard, listed at 389, 462 snaps. No D lineman that I could find playing at least 460 snaps weighed more than 350 pounds.
Crazy.
And
here's my thing though, and I definitely don't want to turn this into like a bash PK segment, but I a lot, Rod, just in terms of okay, what were some of the things that in his evaluation of the defense that Sark went through that led him to make that change? And I don't think it was just one thing. I think it was multiple things. And look, being multiple, being versatile in your defensive front, it's a really big part of keeping people off balance. If you could just present different looks from week to week. I mean, how many weeks have we heard Sark come in on a Monday and be like, hey, we saw something that we hadn't seen on film or that we'd seen very little of? Well, that's a big part of it. It's the ability or your willingness to get into different fronts. Now, we talk about a guy that can play a zero tech or be a one tech, and you love to have it like in a perfect world. You love to have what PK had at Washington when he had Vita Vea, right? Mm-hmm. You'd love for that guy to be your over the ball guy. Those guys are freaks. Like you don't get very many of those guys that can do it at that kind of level, be a first round pick, be kind of that same guy on a Super Bowl champion defense. Like those guys just aren't readily available. And I don't want to say he moneyballed it, Rod, but he really relied more on athleticism with his interior takes. Like Alfred Collins played a lot of A-gap snaps. Byron Murphy played a lot of A-gap snaps. And with those guys, you're relying more on athleticism and their BGO. And, with Alfred Collins, it was length. And Tavondre Sweat could play some of those snaps. And he's another one that fits one of those guys, as big as he was to play as many snaps as he did. But you had some guys and you were versatile enough. I just wanted PK to take it to another level. But I think Will Muschamp will be able to do that. And the same way I feel about Michael Masunas on offense, the ability of the tight end to set the edge in a wide zone run scheme is massive. It's one of those things that you really don't think about until you don't have anybody that has the ability to do that. And I'm not saying anything. It's going to sound like a knock against Jack Indries or Spencer Shannon or Jordan Washington or any of the tight ends last year, but clearly like going from Gunnar Helm and that group you had the previous year, Gunnar Helm was really good at what he did. When you didn't have a guy that was that good at it, it was noticeable. Just like when you didn't have somebody that you felt had the ability to gobble up a lot of A-gap snaps, it showed in your defensive front. But Ian Gerard, like you said, Rod, that's what he is. He's going to give you the ability to have a big guy over the ball to take on blockers. And I think you've got some guys that have some size and athleticism that can play more A-gap snaps. And I think Will Muschamp will probably be more versatile just in terms of moving guys different shades, playing guys like Alex January, I think, is a guy that in certain situations can play over the ball. Hero Kanu is a guy that I think in certain situations can play over the ball, even though Gerard and Zion Williams are probably going to gobble up a lot of those snaps. And you want to be versatile because the thing about being truly multiple with your front is, and Rod, you know this, if I'm a defensive coordinator, I don't want people to know from a down-to-down basis where Colin Simmons is going to be. I don't want an offensive coordinator or an offensive line to get a beat on where is Brad Spence lining up all the time, or where is Lance Jackson lining up all the time, or where is Justice Terry. I want to be able to move those guys around, but you can only really do that if you have those guys that can really anchor your defense and bring it home and be, as you called it before, kind of that rock of Gibraltar in the middle of your defense.
Yeah, and you're going to have also multiple guys, right, that you just pointed out that you confident can play those different shades up front, right? Hero Kanu, you talked about him in the A-gap, but he can, he's a guy that played 38 snaps in the A-gap, 276 in the B-gap, 107 right over the tackle, even put him outside in the C-gap, about 54 snaps. So you move those guys all around the defensive line, depending on. So you can, what Georgia likes to do, what they did against Texas a lot, show that five-man face, try to isolate your best pass rushers against some of their weakest pass protectors, which they did against Texas a lot. You show that five-man face, whether you're talking about, doing it with a bare front or a penny front, however you want to do it. And then you can isolate a guy like Colin Simmons. So I do expect I expect really Muschamp to do a ton of that, whether that's overloading one side of the formation and isolating Colin Simmons on the other side by himself, right? Or whether that's, using a lot more box blitzes, using a lot more stunts. I know you've been talking about it for years. You want PK to run more twists and stunts and games up front. Muschamp, or at least the Georgia defenses, did a lot of that. So I expect him to do a lot more of that to be active with the D-line. And so I'm with you. I think, Justice Terry's a guy. Can't wait to see how they move that guy around. And the guy had an 18% pressure rate. Played, I don't know, just a few snaps, but I already showed you he can create pressure. So what is Muschamp going to do with a guy like that? You should probably see him inside and probably should see him outside. So I think the same thing with guys like Alex January. Think about what you did with, Baron Sorrell toward the end of his career, where you were able to move him around that front a little bit, did some of the same things with Ethan Burke. I think you'll see that even more. I think you'll see Muschamp be even more, I'm going to say extreme, but I think you'll see him be a little bit more enthusiastic about moving guys around who can play multiple shades up front. And like I said, it's all to maximize Colin Simmons to find. And I think you're going to see some of those big edges you got bump down inside for certain. We saw that with Baron Sorrell, Ethan Burke. You're going to see a big body like Lance Jackson, Zena, Umeozulu. You're going to see them bump down inside, try to find favorable matchups, get them up against less athletic interior offensive linemen. That's a Baron Sorrell ate up the matchups when they used to bump him down inside. So I think you're going to get a lot more of that with Muschamp, isolating matchups, trying to manipulate matchups. And like you said, it's all about trying to get these interior defense linemen. One thing they've been lacking is creating pressure, right? They did a lot of that when they had, obviously Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, and before that, Tvondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Here's a freaky Byron Murphy stat, a freaky D tackle stat. Because I've been telling you guys for a while, D tackles is a premium position now. If you can play all three downs, if you stay on the field, and look at the NFL now, it's proving me to be correct. I love this stat. The last 4 teams in the NFL playoffs were NFL leaders in pressures produced by their starting D tackle duos. And what I mean by that is the Broncos led the NFL in their D tackle duos generating pressure. They had 98 of them to their first D tackle duo. Seattle, part of Byron Murphy, part of that. They had 91. They were second. The Rams were third. They had 88. New England was fourth. They had 87. These are D tackle pressures, right? Interior pressure. And by the way, your boy Byron Murphy, tied with Villa for the most pressures at the 0-1 or the 2 technique. All right. Yeah, so that is not a coincidence. That's a big part of where the game is going, getting pressure now with that added value of your interior D lineman. Texas lacked that. They only had 53 pressures from their interior D lineman last year total. Kanu had 20 of them. Guys, in 2023, you're at 126. In 2022, you're at 124. From that, you're at 69. Shout out with Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins leading the way in 2024. And then you drop down to 53, your second lowest number under Sark since 2021 when it was 31. And that was just on a bad defense. You have got to find a way to generate more pressure from your interior D lineman. That's where the game is going. All right. Because everybody's got athletes at the tackle positions because all the athletes are on the edges. Where are the less athletic guys now in the interior? Find you some freaks like you've had the last few years that can get you pressure in the interior. So that means bumping a guy like Justice Terry down in passing situations. Alex January is a freakish athlete. Hero Kanu, I think, is about to take a huge step, man.
I hope so, yeah.
This guy's been playing organized football since 2021. And now he's starting at Texas last year and just started playing football for the first time in 2021. Now you about to put a true, Rock of Gibraltar, as we talk about, there an injured forward next to him who's got the man to double team consistently. Ooh-wee. That dude's, I think he's about to show up. I think he's about to have a big year. Hero coming. Yeah.
By the way, of the 3 of those 4 teams that we're talking about at the last 4 teams standing in the NFL playoffs, your conference championship game, look at some of those D tackles: Byron Murphy, Poona Ford with the Rams, Malcolm Roach with the Broncos. So, this program does produce a lot of really good interior defensive linemen. Even in the down years, Texas has produced really good interior defensive linemen. Yeah. But I could say the same thing as you're laying that out. I could say the same thing about your interior pass rush, your interior pressure, your interior disruption, as I could say about the run game. If you're only able to generate pressure when you've got top 100 draft picks, top 100 draft picks in the mix, then you probably need to do a little bit more to help some guys out, because you can't just rely on freak athleticism to get pressure. And I love the words you used. You used two words. You used the word extreme, because there is a balance here, because we have seen extreme at Texas.
Yeah.
Like with Manny Diaz and Todd Orlando, I think both those guys at times did too much. And guys were out of position, run fits weren't getting hit, and that's when you saw teams just gash Texas. It wasn't because of personnel. I think a lot of times it was scheme deficient, or guys weren't confident in the scheme. And you talk about Muschamp being more enthusiastic. I think that's where it is. I just think you've got to be willing, and it's not like you're just going to try to run all these Xbox blitzes and drop guys out of helicopters and all this different kind of stuff. Sometimes it's simple as, hey, let's just slant the front. If you see a particular, call or whatever, or the linebacker gives you a call, or you see something, you're getting a beat on their protection, hey, slant the front, or whatever the case is. Or, hey, maybe you stem late, or whatever, just simple little aggressive tweaks like that. Man, that can make all the difference between you just having to rely on maybe getting a stalemate, or just win one-on-ones, or getting guys an easier path to disruption. That's ultimately what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's what Muschamp's going to do, especially for guys like, Colin Simmons. I think you're going to get him some easier schemed up pressures, right? I don't know if PK did enough of that. We talk about Sark scheming guys open all the time. Always scheme that open. Look at that, look at the motion, the misdirection, all the different, cheat codes he's using to scheme guys open. We didn't see enough of that from PK. Anthony Hill is probably the biggest example of it. Or lack thereof, of like, come on, man, you can scheme that guy a couple of more pressures. You can scheme that guy a couple of more sacks. He's one of the best, blitzing linebackers, or one of the best pressure producers at the linebacker position in all of college football. And yet, he had a regression in that, from that standpoint, from 2024 to 2025. So I think that were multiple reasons Sark decided to move on from PK, and nothing against PK. I think PK is a hell of a defensive mind. I think Texas wanted a, tougher, more aggressive, more physical defense, period. And a lot of that is on the play caller with their tendencies and how aggressive the calls are and how aggressive the philosophy is defensively, but it's also on the mindset. I mean, and Muschamp is going to make sure it's a physical, aggressive mindset. And I think that I'm with you. It's going to start with the front, that tough, physical, aggressive mindset from him. So I think that's why Jeff Howe was such a big pickup for Texas. Now you can play multiple fronts. I think you had good personnel with Kanu, January, and Watson that you could, be stable enough at the D tackle position. But now with him and then a young Justice Terry up and rising, I think you're going to be able to do some freaky stuff on that D line, especially now adding the edges, with Colin Simmons, of course, but I got Zena and Lance Jackson, they got these frames, man. You got to see these guys in person. Even they got some freaky frames, Lance Jackson does. And I think you could do a lot of good by bumping those guys around their front and doing a lot of, that's what Indiana, I think they were the best in the country at this year. Nobody was better at running twists and stunts in games up front in Indiana. And the timing was uncanny. And they were specifically designed to target certain concepts for the offense. There's even, I don't get deep into the conspiracy theories right there, but they're really good at running their twists and stunts up front, and defensive. They're just trying to create chaos, and they're trying to disrupt blocking schemes. They do a really good job of it. I think you'll get more of that from Muschamp to PK, from PK to Muschamp, I should say.
I know the phrase I'm about to use can generate, eye rolls and teeth gnashing. And I get it. Like sometimes I hate it, but I think at the end of the day, Sark made this move. And as we're talking about the defensive front, because it is when the talent evens out, when you play an Ohio State or a Georgia, or if you get into the playoff and you're playing fill in the blank Big Ten champion, or it's Miami out of the ACC, you get in those semifinal championship type games. When the talent evens out, what is going to be your schematic advantage that helps put you over the top, that gives you that little extra edge? And I think for Sark, he felt like he needed to go somewhere else to get it. And with this personnel, I'm with you, Rod. I think Hero Kanu can end up being, I don't know if he's going to be a first-round pick, but he could end up being, a top 100 type draft pick. And if you've got guys within your box with Colin Simmons, Hero Kanu, and Rasheem Biles, who you can make the argument those three guys have a chance to end the season as the best players at their positions in the SEC, you can't end this season feeling like you left meat on the bone. At the end of the day, that is why Sark made the move, and that is the task for Will Muschamp. Can you take these pieces, get to the end of it, and feel like you didn't leave any meat on the bone?
That's a good point about, we're not even talking about the linebackers very much, but, Rasheem Biles, I believe, ended up having like 100 and a little over 100 and something snaps on the edge, where they would kind of just spin him down on the edge. And that guy, I know he's undersized, but he'll wreak havoc no matter where the hell he's over.
Love him.
So I wouldn't be surprised that with the linebackers, Tiny Smith didn't do it as much in Texas, but we know Texas defense, PK, that was one of the things he actually did do a lot of the times was spin those linebackers down to the edge. And they've been recruiting linebackers with that added value of being a guy that can be a disruptor on the edge. So keep that in mind too. You could end up in some of those or shifting to some of those, penny fronts where you roll Rasheem Biles down to the edge with Colin Simmons on the edge and, drop down Jelani McDonald, the linebacker depth. You could do some real freaky stuff with all these different body types that you have, right? Bump, Lance Jackson down inside, present a bear front. You can do all this really cool stuff, I think, with this group you have. And like you said, make the picture look very different from pre-snap, to post-snap.
100%. Yep.
Bumping pieces around and moving pieces, being very, I think being very deliberate. But you can also do it, like you said, it can be subtle things. Like it doesn't have to be in the big shifts we're talking about. We're talking about subtle things just to create the one-on-one matchup that you want.
I don't know if he'd ever say this publicly, but it could be a deal where Sark is just like, look, I'm tired of people doing this to me. Exactly. I want to force the issue and do it to some folks.
And like I said, Georgia did it to Texas a lot. That 5-man face, where they would just show that 5-man face in different varieties, and either they would twist and stunt from it or they would run a sim pressure out of it. But either way, they would confuse the blocking scheme over and over. And we saw how that worked out against Texas. Yeah. But you'll see. But good stuff there. Great stuff. Breakdown. Appreciate that, Jeff, as always. Always feel like a smarter football theorist after a conversation. Thanks to each and every one of you out there for watching and for listening. And we'll be back next week with another edition of Football Theory. For Jeff and for all of for Matthew behind the scenes as well. He's a real MVP. I'm Mike Tomlin and Rod Babers. Until next time, hook 'em horns.